My sister texted, "I hope you end up alone." Hours later, my parents called, "She's hospitalized, send $35,000 or she won't make it." I hung up and went back to sleep. Then chaos exploded everywhere. The sterile glow of my phone screen cut through the pre-dawn darkness, a digital shard piercing the quiet of my apartment. It was 3:18 a.m. I let it ring 4 times, the vibration a dull hum against the nightstand, before finally answering. Even in that half-sleep state, a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Good news, I'd learned, rarely arrived when the world was still asleep. "Your sister's in the hospital," my mother's voice declared, thick with what felt less like genuine distress and more like a performance. A carefully rehearsed panic, almost. "She needs surgery immediately. The doctors say it's critical. We need $35,000 by morning or they won't operate." I sat up, my hand automatically raking through my hair, trying to make sense of the sudden, urgent demand. "Which hospital?" I asked, the practical question an automatic defense against the manufactured chaos. "That doesn't matter right now," she snapped, dropping the pretense of fragility. "We need you to wire the money. Your father and I don't have that kind of cash available, and Meredith's insurance won't cover this procedure. You're the only one who can help." "An accident," she explained. "A fall down the stairs at home. Internal bleeding. If the money wasn't there tonight, Meredith could die by morning." The words tumbled out, each one designed to trigger an immediate, unthinking reaction. But my mind, bless its weary soul, refused to play along. My eyes, adjusting to the gloom, drifted to the phone screen I'd set down just hours earlier. And there it was, stark and inescapable, a text message, received at 11:47 p.m. Meredith's name, blazing like a neon sign of malice. "Hope you die alone, you pathetic loser." Wait. Let that sink in. Less than 4 hours before my parents called, claiming my sister was on death's door, that same sister had wished death and isolation upon me. The timestamp glowed, a cold, hard fact in the face of their sudden, desperate plea. "No," I said, the word emerging without conscious thought, flat and certain. A beat of stunned silence, then my mother's voice, cracking, "What? You can't be serious. This is your sister. Your only sister." "I'm very serious," I replied, pulling the covers back. "I'm going back to sleep now. Good night." And I hung up. Immediately, the phone rang again. I silenced it, plugged it into the charger, and buried myself under the duvet. Sleep, surprisingly, came easier than I expected. Perhaps it was the sheer exhaustion, or perhaps, for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. The next morning, the silence was shattered by the sheer volume of my phone's notifications. 73 missed calls. 42 text messages. A digital avalanche of manufactured outrage and emotional blackmail. I didn't even glance at them before making my coffee, the rich, bitter aroma a small act of defiance. The messages, when I finally scrolled through, were a gallery of family dysfunction. My mother's tearful begging, my father's cold, righteous anger, and my brother-in-law Troy's rambling paragraphs about what a horrible person I was for letting his wife die. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had strong opinions about my character, and an uncle I'd met twice at funerals informed me I'd burn in hell. I deleted them all. Every single one. No response. Then I drove to work. Looking back, this was the beginning of my understanding of a concept called emotional manipulation and the scammer's playbook. My family, whether consciously or not, was employing classic tactics, creating an urgent, life-or-death crisis, isolating me as the only one who can help, and leveraging guilt and family obligation to bypass rational thought. They assumed I'd react on instinct, driven by a manufactured sense of duty, just as I always had. The immediate pivot to character assassination when I didn't comply? That's an extinction burst in action, a desperate attempt to regain control when their usual methods fail. It's a chillingly common pattern in coercive relationships, designed to break down a victim's resolve. My colleague Patricia noticed something was off during our morning meeting. I'd been staring at the conference room wall for what felt like an eternity, completely disengaged while she discussed the Brennan account. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. "Family emergency," I said, shrugging. "They'll get over it. She didn't press further, and I appreciated her quiet understanding. Patricia had met my family once, years ago at a company holiday party. Meredith, in her usual fashion, had gotten spectacularly drunk and loudly informed anyone within earshot that I'd always been jealous of her because she was the pretty one, the fun one. The one who actually knew how to live life instead of hiding behind spreadsheets and business suits. Patricia had quietly suggested we leave early that night. The office phone, bless its antiquated soul, rang at 2:30 p.m. Gina, our receptionist, transferred a call from someone claiming to be my mother. Curiosity, that dangerous little imp, got the better of me. I picked up. The hospital is threatening to discharge Meredith without the surgery, Mom blurted out, no greeting, straight to the crisis. They're saying she can recover at home with pain medication and monitoring. A small, cynical part of me thought, aha. Sounds like she'll be fine then, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. How can you be so cruel? Her tone was accusatory, indignant. This is your sister, lying in a hospital bed, suffering, and you won't even help her. The same sister, I countered, my voice low, who texted me last night hoping I die alone. That sister. Silence. A heavy, stretched-out silence that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Then, a weak defense. She didn't mean that. She was upset. You know how she gets when she's emotional. I do know, I said, a bitter clarity in my voice. And that's exactly why I'm not sending any money. We raised you better than this, she began, escalating to the classic parental guilt trip. Your father is so disappointed. He can barely look at photos of you anymore. Tell Dad I said hello, I replied, then hung up and blocked their number from the office line. The brazenness of it, the expectation that I would simply fall in line, was almost breathtaking. That evening brought a new wave of attacks, but this time, the arena was public, social media. Meredith had posted a long, rambling status update about her heartless sister, who refused to save her life, complete with a dramatically pale photo of herself in a hospital gown. The comment section, predictably, exploded. People I'd never met piled on, calling me every name imaginable. Several even tagged me directly, ensuring I couldn't escape their outrage. I reported a post for harassment, then went to the gym. Sometimes, the only way to deal with external chaos is to create some internal order, one rep at a time. This public shaming, combined with the family's coordinated attacks, illustrates a deeply unhealthy family dynamic often rooted in enmeshment and enabling. In enmeshed families, boundaries between members are blurred or non-existent. Individual identities are suppressed in favor of a collective, often dysfunctional, identity. Meredith's chronic issues were constantly enabled by my parents, who stepped in to fix her problems, often at my expense. This created a perverse incentive structure. Meredith learned that crisis equaled attention and resources, while I, the responsible one, was expected to be self-sufficient and undemanding. My refusal to participate broke the unspoken rules of this enmeshed system, triggering a furious backlash as they attempted to force me back into my assigned role as the family scapegoat and ATM. 3 days passed. The calls and messages, blessedly, began to decrease as my family realized I wasn't going to respond. Meredith posted another update, declaring she was recovering at home, that God had blessed her with survival despite having such a terrible sister, and that she would never forget who abandoned her in her darkest hour. I bought new running shoes and increased my morning jog distance. Actions, not words, were my new currency. Then, 2 weeks later, the truth, like a persistent weed, started to push its way through the cracks. It came from an unexpected source. My Aunt Rosemary, my mother's younger sister, who had always maintained a strained relationship with the rest of the family. She called from a number I didn't recognize. Thinking it might be work-related, I answered. I need to tell you something about Meredith's hospital visit, Rosemary said without preamble, her voice tight with suppressed anger. Your parents are lying to you. The whole thing was staged. I pulled my car over into a deserted grocery store parking lot, my heart hammering. Staged how? Rosemary laid it all out. Meredith had gone to the ER with chest pains. They ran tests, found nothing serious, gave her anxiety medication, and sent her home after 6 hours. The bill? A grand total of $800. My mother, seeing an opportunity, had decided to turn it into an elaborate scheme to extract money from me because Meredith and Troy were 3 months behind on their mortgage. How do you know this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Troy got drunk last weekend at a barbecue, Rosemary explained, and started bragging about it. Said they almost got 35 grand out of you, but you were too stubborn to care if your own sister died. He thought it was hilarious they tried. Your mother was furious with him for talking, but several people heard. I figured you deserved to know what they're really like. Why are you telling me? The question was out before I could stop it. Because I've watched your mother manipulate people my whole life, she said, a deep weariness in her tone, and I'm tired of staying quiet about it. She did the same thing to me 10 years ago. Claimed she needed money for emergency surgery that turned out to be an elective cosmetic procedure. I gave her $12,000 I never got back. You were smart to say no. We talked for another 20 minutes. Rosemary confirmed details I'd suspected but never wanted to acknowledge. How Mom had always favored Meredith. How she'd convinced Dad that I was difficult and ungrateful. How Meredith had learned to weaponize their parents' favoritism into a lifetime of getting whatever she wanted, while I was expected to be the responsible one who asked for nothing. After we hung up, I sat in that parking lot for an hour, watching people load groceries into their cars, wondering how many of them had families that would fake medical emergencies for money. The world felt a little less certain, a little more grotesque. The next move in their desperate game came from an unexpected direction. My father, of all people, showed up at my office building on a Thursday afternoon, waiting in the lobby until I came down for a coffee break. Security called up to ask if I wanted them to remove him. No, I said, and went down to handle it myself. Dad looked older than I remembered. His hair, once peppered with gray, had gone completely white since I'd last seen him at Christmas, 18 months ago. He stood when I approached, his expression a strange mix of anger and exhaustion. We need to talk, he said, his voice flat. No, we don't, I replied, crossing my arms. Your mother is devastated, he continued, ignoring me. She cries every night because of what you've done to this family. What I've done? I scoffed. I didn't take a medical emergency to extort money from anyone. His face reddened, a familiar signal of his rising temper. Meredith was genuinely scared. She thought something was seriously wrong. Your mother was trying to help her get the best care possible by lying about needing $35,000 for a surgery that never happened. Dad, that's not helping, I said, shaking my head. That's fraud. Don't talk to me about fraud, he thundered, his voice attracting the attention of several people in the lobby. You've defrauded this family of basic human decency. Meredith needed support, and you abandoned her. Meredith needed $800 for an ER visit that found nothing wrong, I stated calmly, sticking to the facts. She got anxiety medication and went home. Those are the facts, whether you want to acknowledge them or not. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. You've always been jealous of your sister. Always trying to make her look bad, because she has what you don't. A husband, a family, people who actually care about her. Something cold, hard, and utterly final settled in my chest. Is that what you really think? I asked. That I'm jealous? What else would explain this cruelty? He pressed, conviction in his eyes. Your own sister reaches out for help, and you turn your back. What kind of person does that? The kind who's tired, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it felt like a shout, of being treated like an ATM machine by people who've spent my entire life telling me I'm not good enough. I picked up my coffee cup, which I'd set on a nearby table. You should leave now. I have work to do. If you walk away right now, he threatened, his voice rising again, you're walking away from this family permanently. Your mother, and I won't tolerate this disrespect any longer. I headed toward the elevator, my back ramrod straight. You haven't tolerated me for years, Dad, I called back over my shoulder. This just makes it official. His voice followed me across the lobby, a final, venomous dart. Don't come crying to us when you end up alone with nobody who cares whether you live or die. I pressed the elevator button and waited, keeping my back to him, until the doors opened. Several people in the lobby were staring. I didn't care. The doors closed on Dad's angry, contorted face, and I rode back up to the 14th floor in silence. This entire episode, from the relentless calls to Dad's public accusation, perfectly illustrates a phenomenon known as an extinction burst. When a behavior that was previously reinforced, my compliance, my money, is no longer rewarded, the individual exhibiting that behavior, my family, will often intensify their efforts. They try harder, they get louder, they become more outrageous. It's a desperate, last-ditch effort to get the old behavior, my giving in, to return. It can be incredibly painful and confusing, as the person setting boundaries feels like things are getting worse before they get better. But understanding that it's a natural, albeit unpleasant, part of the boundary-setting process is crucial for maintaining resolve. That night, I contacted a lawyer. Derek Walsh specialized in family law and, bless his weary soul, had seen cases like mine before. I didn't plan to take legal action immediately, but I wanted documentation. Preserve everything, Derek advised, his voice calm and reassuring. The original text from Meredith, the call logs, Rosemary's testimony, the social media posts. You might need this if they escalate. Some families don't know when to stop. He listed potential escalations, false police reports, defamatory statements, showing up at my workplace repeatedly, full-blown harassment campaigns. I've seen all of it, he concluded. I paid his retainer fee and left his office with a plan for documentation and protection. And believe it or not, they got worse. Meredith's husband, Troy, started calling my office directly. He'd bypassed Gina, our receptionist, by claiming to be a client with an urgent matter. The first time, he actually got through to my desk. He spent 15 minutes screaming at me, accusing me of trying to kill his wife through neglect. I hung up and reported his number. It didn't stop him. He simply called from different phones. The harassment then expanded to my professional network. Troy created fake LinkedIn profiles, sending insidious messages to my colleagues and supervisors. He claimed I'd stolen money from my dying sister, and suggested they should reconsider employing someone with such questionable ethics. My boss, Susan, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, called me into her office after receiving the third message. I know this is garbage, Susan said, showing me her phone. But I need you to make it stop. It's reflecting on the whole department. This was the moment I was prepared for. I showed her the meticulously compiled documentation Derek had helped me gather. Screenshots, call logs, witness statements from Rosemary. Even medical records Rosemary had obtained through Meredith's own careless social media posts that directly contradicted the emergency surgery story. Susan reviewed everything, her expression hardening with each piece of evidence. Do you want to press charges? She asked, looking up. I want them to leave me alone, I said, tired. If legal action accomplishes that, then yes. Let me talk to corporate legal, she said, already reaching for her phone. We might be able to send a cease and desist on behalf of the company since he's targeting you through work channels. 5 days later, a cease and desist letter arrived at Troy and Meredith's house on official company letterhead, signed by 3 attorneys, promising swift legal action if the harassment continued. Derek sent his own letter the same day, documenting the fraud attempt and threatening civil action for defamation and emotional distress. And then, silence. Blissful, complete silence that lasted for almost 3 weeks. I used that precious time to rebuild the parts of my life they'd managed to damage. The stress of the harassment had cost me sleep, affected my concentration at work, and left me constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack. Now, with legal protection in place and their communications blocked, I could finally breathe. Patricia, surprisingly, became an unexpected ally during this period. She invited me to join her book club, a group of 6 incredible women who met monthly at a wine bar downtown. I'd never been much of a joiner, always too busy, too tired, or too worried about what my family might need from me next. But now, with that enormous weight lifted, I found myself actually enjoying these evenings. The women in the group had their own complicated family stories, their own scars. Jennifer had been disowned by her parents for marrying outside their religion 15 years ago. Alexis hadn't spoken to her brother in a decade after he'd stolen their grandmother's jewelry and pawned it to pay gambling debts. Shauna's mother still called her fat every time they spoke, despite Shauna being a perfectly healthy weight and a marathon runner. We didn't spend our meetings dwelling on family dysfunction, but knowing these women understood, really understood, made the occasional mentions easier. When I briefly explained why I'd cut off contact with my parents and sister, nobody gasped or tried to convince me that family is everything, and I should reconsider. Jennifer simply nodded and said, "Good for you. That takes real courage." Work, too, continued to improve. The Brennan account expansion led to my team being assigned 2 additional major clients, both requiring the same detailed analytical approach that had made the original project so successful. I hired 2 junior analysts to help manage the increased workload, spending weeks training them on the systems and standards I'd developed. One of them, a recent graduate named Marcus, reminded me uncomfortably of my younger self. Eager to please, apologetic for taking up space, constantly worried about being a burden. During our 3rd week working together, he apologized for the 5th time in an hour for asking clarifying questions. "Marcus, stop," I said, setting down my pen. "Questions are part of learning. You're not bothering me. This is literally my job to make sure you understand what you're doing. I just don't want to waste your time," he mumbled, looking at his shoes. "You're not wasting anything," I replied, a sudden memory flashing in my mind. "Where did you learn that asking for help was a waste of someone's time?" He looked uncomfortable. "My parents always said I needed to figure things out myself. That successful people don't need their hands held." I recognized that philosophy. My parents had said similar things to me countless times, usually right before praising Meredith for asking them to solve all her problems. The double standard had been invisible to them, but glaringly obvious to me. "Your parents were wrong," I told Marcus, a newfound conviction in my voice. "Successful people ask questions, learn from experts, and build on other people's knowledge. That's how progress happens. So ask me whatever you need to ask, and I'll let you know if I'm actually too busy to answer." He nodded slowly, and over the following months, I watched him gain confidence. He stopped apologizing constantly, started contributing ideas in meetings, and developed into a genuinely skilled analyst. Watching his transformation felt oddly healing, like I was giving someone else the support and encouragement I'd never received. It was a tangible sign of my own growth, a testament to the fact that breaking free had allowed me to truly nurture others. The healing wasn't always straightforward, though. Small things would trigger unexpected reactions. A colleague mentioning her sister helped her move into a new apartment, and I'd feel a sharp twist of something I couldn't quite name. A commercial showing a mother and daughter shopping together, laughing about shared memories, and I'd have to leave the room. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Caroline Winters. She was in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach that I appreciated. "You're grieving," she explained during our 4th session. "Not for who they actually were, but for who you wish they could have been. That's a legitimate loss." "I don't feel sad," I admitted. "Mostly I feel relieved." "Grief isn't always sadness," she said, her voice gentle. "Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it's just emptiness where a relationship should have been. All of those are valid responses to losing family, even when you're the one who made the choice to walk away." We talked about my childhood, the patterns I'd normalized because I didn't have a framework to understand they were dysfunctional. How Meredith could crash her car 3 times in high school, and Dad just bought her a new one each time. But when I asked if they could help with college textbooks, Mom said I needed to learn financial responsibility. How holidays always revolved around what Meredith wanted, where she wanted to go, who she wanted to invite. How I'd learned to make myself small and undemanding because needing things only led to disappointment. "You trained yourself not to have needs," Dr. Winters observed. "That's a survival mechanism, but it's also a prison. You're allowed to want things. You're allowed to expect basic respect and consideration from the people in your life." The concept felt foreign yet intriguing. I'd spent so long being the low-maintenance one, the person who could be counted on not to cause problems or make demands. Building a life where I actually expressed preferences and expectations required rewiring decades of conditioning. I started small, telling Patricia when I didn't want to see a movie she'd suggested instead of just going along with it, letting Marcus know when I needed uninterrupted work time instead of always being available for questions, Ending a third date with someone who'd spent the entire evening talking about himself without asking me a single question, instead of giving him another chance because maybe he'd been nervous. Each small assertion of my own needs and boundaries felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. This process of identifying and expressing one's own needs, after years of suppression, is a fundamental part of healthy individual development and breaking cycles of codependency. It's often the hardest, but most rewarding, part of reclaiming autonomy. The book club met at Jennifer's house for our October gathering. Her place was warm and welcoming, full of plants and comfortable furniture, the kind of casual clutter that made a space feel lived in rather than staged. We were discussing a memoir about family estrangement when Alexis, ever direct, asked me how I was handling the aftermath of cutting off my family. Honestly, better than I expected, I said. I kept waiting for this crushing guilt or regret, and it just never came. Mostly I'm just angry it took me so long. That's because you were trained to prioritize their feelings over your own, Shauna said, sipping her wine. It takes time to unlearn that programming. Jennifer refilled my wine glass. Have they tried contacting you since the legal letters? Not a word, I replied, a sense of quiet triumph in my voice. I think they finally realized I meant it. Good, Alexis said firmly. Some people only understand boundaries when there are consequences for crossing them. We moved on to discussing the book, but the conversation stayed with me. These women had become something my family never was, a genuine support system. They celebrated my successes without jealousy, offered help without strings attached, and respected my boundaries without making me feel guilty for having them. This, I realized, was what healthy relationships looked like. Thanksgiving approached, my first holiday completely separate from my family of origin. The prospect should have felt lonely or sad. But instead, I found myself planning a Friendsgiving dinner with the book club women. We each brought dishes, ate too much, and spent the evening playing board games and sharing stories that had nothing to do with family obligation or guilt. Patricia pulled me aside while we were cleaning up. You know, you're glowing, right? She said, a genuine smile on her face. I don't mean that in a cheesy way. You literally look healthier and happier than I've ever seen you. I feel it, I admitted, a soft laugh escaping me. It's like I've been holding my breath for 34 years and finally exhaled. That's beautiful, she said, squeezing my arm. I'm proud of you. You know, what you did took real strength. Her words meant more than she probably knew. My parents had never said they were proud of me. Not even when I graduated summa cum laude, or got promoted, or bought my first apartment. Meredith received praise for showing up, for trying, for merely existing. I received expectations and criticism, and the assumption that my accomplishments were just what I was supposed to do. Hearing someone acknowledge my strength and walking away felt like being seen for the first time. December brought a complicated test. Rosemary called again. Meredith and Troy, she said, were definitely heading toward their first divorce. Meredith had apparently discovered Troy had been having an affair with a hostess from the failed restaurant, and the fallout was spectacular. She's calling everyone in the family asking for money to hire a better lawyer, Rosemary informed me. Your father gave her $10,000. She's been posting on social media about betrayal and how family is supposed to support each other in hard times. Let me guess, I said, a wry smile touching my lips. She wants me to contribute too. Your mother already reached out to several cousins claiming you'd want to help, but she didn't have your current number, Rosemary confirmed. I shut that down immediately, but I thought you should know what they're attempting. I thanked Rosemary for the warning and felt nothing but relief that I'd changed my number and blocked all their access. The old me would have felt guilty, would have wondered if I should help despite everything. The new me recognized the manipulation attempt for what it was and went about my day unbothered. Dr. Winters and I discussed it during my next session. How do you feel about your sister's divorce? She asked. I feel bad for her kids, I said honestly. They are the innocent victims in all of this. But Meredith chose Troy, chose to stay with him through all his failures and schemes. Chose to participate in trying to defraud me. Her consequences aren't my responsibility. That's a healthy perspective, Dr. Winters affirmed. Are you worried she might escalate again? The legal protections are still in place, I replied, a calm certainty in my voice. If she tries anything, Derek will handle it. I'm not going to live my life waiting for the next attack. Winter settled in, bringing shorter days and longer nights. I started taking evening painting classes at a community center, finally pursuing a hobby I discovered I enjoyed, despite being terrible at it. The instructor, an older woman named Vivian, had a philosophy I appreciated. Art isn't about being good. It's about expressing yourself and enjoying the process. My paintings were objectively bad, colors that didn't quite work, proportions that seemed off, techniques I couldn't master no matter how many times Vivian demonstrated them. But creating them made me happy. Choosing colors, deciding what to paint, allowing myself to make something imperfect just for the joy of making it. All of it felt like reclaiming parts of myself I'd suppressed for years. Marcus, my junior analyst, asked to see my work one day after overhearing me mention the class to Patricia. I showed him a painting of Cooper, my newly adopted dog, sitting in a vibrant field. The proportions were slightly wrong, but the colors were cheerful and alive. "I love this," he said, surprising me. "It's got personality. Like, you can tell someone made this because they wanted to, not because they were trying to prove anything." His words captured exactly what I'd been feeling, but couldn't articulate. I'd spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy, valuable, deserving of basic love and respect. These paintings existed just because I enjoyed making them. No deeper purpose, no validation seeking, just creation for its own sake. The year ended quietly. I spent New Year's Eve at Jennifer's party, surrounded by the book club women and their partners and friends. At midnight, we toasted to new beginnings and letting go of what no longer served us. To choosing ourselves, Alexis said, raising her glass. We all drank to that. Then, Mom had a stroke. Aunt Rosemary called to tell me, her voice gentle but firm. "It's real this time. I'm at the hospital with her. Your father is here. Meredith is flying in tomorrow morning. I thought you should know, but I'll understand if you don't come." "How bad?" I asked, a strange detachment in my voice. "Serious, but stable. She'll need rehabilitation, probably months of it. The doctors say she'll recover most of her function if she does the work." I thanked Rosemary and ended the call. Then I sat on my couch for 2 hours, staring at the wall, trying to figure out what I felt. Anger, yes. Sadness, maybe. Relief that I felt nothing resembling the guilt they probably expected me to feel. I didn't go to the hospital. Meredith sent a text the next day. Her first direct communication since the initial, "Hope you die alone" message. "Mom had a stroke, and you can't even visit. You really are heartless. Dad was right about you." I blocked her number. There was simply nothing left to say. 3 weeks later, the bills started arriving at my apartment. Medical invoices addressed to me, despite my name being nowhere on Mom's insurance or treatment paperwork. Someone had given the hospital my information and claimed I'd agreed to be financially responsible for Mom's care. Derek made 3 phone calls and got it sorted out within 48 hours. The hospital apologized for the confusion and removed my information from their system. He also sent another letter to my parents' address, this one outlining potential criminal fraud charges if they continued attempting to financially obligate me without consent. More silence followed. I threw myself into work. The Brennan account expanded into 3 additional projects. Susan promoted me to senior analyst with a substantial raise. I bought a condo in a better neighborhood and adopted a dog from the shelter, a 3-year-old mixed breed named Cooper who had been surrendered by owners who said they didn't have time for him anymore. I changed my phone number and didn't give the new one to anyone from my family except Rosemary. I stopped checking social media entirely, deleting all my accounts and feeling lighter the moment they disappeared. The social media detox revealed just how much mental energy I'd been wasting on maintaining appearances and monitoring what my family said about me. Without the constant stream of Meredith's passive-aggressive posts about fake family members and Mom's pointed shares about ungrateful children, I found myself with hours of free time I hadn't realized I'd been losing. I filled those hours deliberately. I started learning piano through online tutorials, something I'd wanted to do since childhood, but my parents had said was impractical and expensive. The keyboard I bought wasn't fancy, but sitting down to practice scales in my living room felt like reclaiming a piece of childhood wonder I'd abandoned, trying to be the daughter they wanted. Work took an interesting turn when Susan approached me about leading a new initiative, developing predictive analytics tools for client retention. The project would mean managing a larger team, interfacing directly with C-suite executives, and potentially traveling quarterly to our satellite offices. 2 years ago, I would have hesitated, worried about being away from family obligations or what emergencies might arise while I was unavailable. Now, I said yes immediately. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase and my own corner office, with windows overlooking the city. Marcus, who'd become an invaluable team member, congratulated me with genuine enthusiasm. "You deserve this," he said, beaming. "You've taught me more about this industry than 4 years of college did." His words reminded me of something Dr. Winters had said during one of our sessions. "The people who matter will celebrate your success, not resent it." My family had always treated my achievements as either expected or threatening. Meredith especially had a talent for diminishing anything good that happened to me, turning my promotions into examples of how I was all work and no life, or suggesting I probably kissed up to get ahead. Being surrounded by colleagues who genuinely supported each other felt revolutionary. The new role brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. One of the executives I worked with, Gerald, had a management style that reminded me uncomfortably of my father. He expected people to read his mind, got frustrated when they asked clarifying questions, and took credit for his team's successes while blaming them for any failures. Several team members came to me privately, expressing frustration with his behavior. In the past, I would have stayed silent, tried to work around the problem, made myself smaller to avoid conflict. But therapy and distance from my family had given me new tools. I documented Gerald's behavior carefully, gathered statements from affected team members, and presented the information to Susan with specific examples and suggested solutions. Susan took it seriously. Gerald received coaching on his management approach, and 2 of his direct reports were quietly reassigned to different projects. The situation improved gradually, and several people thanked me for addressing what they'd been tolerating for years. "How did you know he'd actually listen?" Marcus asked after hearing about the outcome. "I didn't know," I admitted. "But I knew staying silent wasn't going to change anything. Sometimes you have to risk conflict to create something better." That philosophy extended into my personal life. I'd been casually dating, nothing serious, until I met Kevin at a gallery opening Jennifer dragged me to. He was looking at the same abstract piece I'd been studying, a chaotic swirl of colors that somehow felt peaceful. "I can't decide if I love this or hate this," he said, noticing me beside him. "Maybe it's both," I suggested. "Sometimes the most interesting things are complicated." We ended up talking for 2 hours, long after Jennifer had left with the person she'd actually come to meet. Kevin was an architect who specialized in sustainable building design, recently divorced. With a 12-year-old daughter he had joint custody of. He'd been in therapy for 3 years, processing the end of his marriage and the complicated relationship with his ex-wife. Our first official date was coffee that turned into dinner that turned into walking around downtown, talking until the restaurants started closing. He told me about his daughter Lily, how she was struggling with the divorce and acting out at school. I told him about cutting off my family, the broad strokes without going into painful detail. "That must have been hard," Kevin said. "Staying would have been harder," I replied. I finally figured out the difference between hard because it's painful and hard because it's wrong. He understood that distinction in a way most people didn't. His own family had complicated dynamics, a mother who'd never approved of his ex-wife and took the divorce as validation of her opinions, a brother who'd borrowed money repeatedly and never paid it back, a father who'd walked out when Kevin was 15 and recently tried to reconnect now that Kevin was successful. We didn't bond over family trauma exactly, but there was a shared understanding that made conversations easier. Neither of us had to explain why we'd set certain boundaries or why we were cautious about letting people too close. Dating Kevin felt different than previous relationships. We took things slowly, both of us wary after being hurt by people we trusted. He met Cooper on our 5th date, bringing treats and spending 20 minutes throwing a ball in the park while I watched them play. Cooper's approval felt significant. He'd always been a good judge of character. I met Lily 2 months into dating Kevin, a carefully orchestrated casual meeting at a museum. She was quiet and observant, clearly sizing me up and trying to figure out if I was a threat to her relationship with her dad. I didn't try too hard to win her over, just treated her like a person worthy of respect rather than an obstacle to navigate. Your dog is cool, she said when Kevin showed her pictures on his phone. Can I meet him sometime? Sure, I replied, he loves meeting new people. That simple exchange felt like passing some kind of test. Kevin told me later that Lily had asked if I seemed nice, a question apparently loaded with significance given how badly she'd reacted to the last person he'd dated. The relationship progressed naturally. Kevin started staying over some weekends when Lily was with her mother. I met his friends, he met mine, and we fell into comfortable rhythms of shared meals and long conversations and quiet evenings reading in the same room. Patricia noticed the change. You're in love with him, she stated, more than asked. Maybe, I admitted. It's different than I expected. Calmer, less dramatic. That's because it's healthy, she said, her smile soft. Healthy love isn't supposed to be a roller coaster. It's supposed to be stable and supportive and genuine. I thought about Meredith and Troy. Their relationship characterized by constant drama, breakups, and grand gestures that never addressed their fundamental incompatibility. My parents had seemed to consider their explosive fights and tearful reconciliations proof of passion rather than dysfunction. What Kevin and I had was different. We disagreed sometimes, worked through conflicts with actual communication, and respected each other's boundaries and needs. When I told him I needed space to process something, he gave it without making it about him. When he shared his anxieties about being a good father, I listened without trying to fix everything immediately. This was what partnership looked like when both people were whole individuals choosing to share their lives rather than broken people trying to complete each other. The legal threats must have worked, because nobody from my family attempted contact again. Rosemary sent occasional updates through email. Mom's recovery was progressing slowly. Dad had retired. Meredith and Troy were talking about bankruptcy after the restaurant finally closed. I felt nothing reading these updates except mild curiosity, the way you might feel learning facts about strangers in a news article. My life didn't have room for people who saw me as a resource instead of a person. 2 years after the fake hospital emergency, I ran into Patricia at a coffee shop downtown. We hadn't worked together since she'd transferred to the Boston office, but she was back in town visiting family. We caught up over lattes, talking about work and relationships and the weird ways life unfolds when you're not paying attention. You seem different, Patricia said eventually. Lighter, maybe? I can't quite pin it down. I cut off my family, I said simply. Turns out they were the weight I've been carrying. She nodded slowly. I remember your sister from that holiday party. The drunk one who kept insulting you. That's the one, I confirmed. She tried to scam me for $35,000 by faking a medical emergency. When that didn't work, they all harassed me for months. Patricia's eyes widened. That's insane. It was predictable, actually, I corrected. I just finally stopped pretending it wasn't happening. We talked for another hour about families, boundaries, and the strange guilt that comes with choosing yourself over people who share your DNA. Patricia admitted she'd gone through something similar with her own father years earlier. A rift that had never healed, but had allowed her to build a life free from constant manipulation and criticism. Do you regret it? I asked her. Not for a second. Some people don't deserve access to you just because they're related. That's a hard lesson, but an important one. Walking back to my car later, Cooper trotting beside me on his leash, I realized Patricia was right. The guilt had evaporated somewhere along the way, replaced by something more solid and sustainable. Peace. My phone rang that evening, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity, again, won out. This is Meredith. Her voice sounded strained, older somehow. Don't hang up, please. I waited. Mom died yesterday. Heart attack. Dad wanted me to call you. There's going to be a funeral on Saturday. Silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, unsteady and nervous. I'm sorry for your loss, I said finally. That's it, she demanded, her voice rising. That's all you have to say? She was your mother, too. Don't you feel anything? I thought about that. Really considered it. I feel sad that she spent her whole life playing favorites and manipulating people instead of just being honest, I said, my voice even. I feel sad that she chose to enable your worst behaviors instead of helping you become a better person. Mostly, I feel sad that we never had the relationship I deserve to have with a mother. Meredith's breath caught. You blamed her for everything. You never took responsibility for being a difficult, judgmental person who looked down on everyone. I took responsibility, I countered, the words firm and clear, by removing myself from a toxic situation. That's more than you've ever done. The funeral is at Riverside Chapel at 2 o'clock, she announced, clearly trying to regain control. Dad expects you to be there. I won't be attending, I told her. Tell Dad I said he should focus on the family he has left. You're really not coming to your own mother's funeral? She sounded incredulous. I'm really not coming. Goodbye, Meredith. I ended the call and blocked the number. Cooper nudged my hand with his nose, sensing the residual tension. I scratched behind his ears and pulled up a delivery app to order dinner. Saturday arrived clear and sunny. I took Cooper to the lake for a long hike, threw a tennis ball until my arm got tired, and stopped for ice cream on the way home. My phone stayed silent all day. I'd half expected more harassment, more attempts to guilt me into attending. But apparently, they'd finally accepted that I meant what I said. The inheritance drama started 3 weeks later. An attorney representing Dad's estate contacted me through my office, somehow tracking down my new contact information. There was a small inheritance from Mom, about $15,000 from a life insurance policy that listed both daughters as beneficiaries. Dad was contesting the distribution, claiming I'd abandoned the family and didn't deserve anything. Derek handled it with his usual efficiency. The policy was legally binding. Dad's feelings about my worthiness were irrelevant. The insurance company cut me a check 8 weeks later. I donated the entire amount to a nonprofit organization that provided legal aid to people dealing with family financial abuse. The tax receipt arrived in January. I filed it with my other documents and forgot about it. Years continued passing. I got promoted again, this time to director level. Kevin and I were still together, our relationship deepening into a quiet, profound partnership. Rosemary remained my only connection to the family I'd left behind. She sent occasional emails, never pushing for reconciliation, just sharing information in case I wanted it. Dad remarried 2 years after Mom died, a widow from his church who had 3 adult children of her own. Meredith and Troy divorced, then reconciled, then divorced again. Their kids were teenagers now, struggling with the chaos their parents created. I felt sympathy for those kids, understanding what it meant to grow up in a household where love came with conditions and manipulation was considered normal. But I couldn't help them. That wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility was to Cooper, to Kevin, to the team I managed at work, to the life I built from scratch after walking away from people who wanted to tear me down. Some nights I still thought about that text message. Hope you die alone, you pathetic loser. And the phone call that followed hours later, demanding $35,000 or my sister would die. The audacity of it still amazed me. The absolute confidence that I would comply, that I could be manipulated through manufactured crisis and guilt. They'd been wrong about me. Dead wrong. I didn't die alone. I lived surrounded by people who genuinely cared, who showed up without expecting payment, who treated kindness as something freely given instead of a transaction requiring reimbursement. The family I'd chosen was better than the one I'd been born into. That simple truth had taken me 34 years to accept, but once I did, everything else fell into place. Cooper nudged my hand again, pulling me back to the present moment. Kevin was making dinner in the kitchen, humming along to music I couldn't quite hear. Outside the window, the city lights were starting to flicker on as evening settled in. My phone sat on the coffee table, silent and peaceful. No demands, no guilt trips, no manufactured emergencies designed to extract money or compliance. Just silence. Beautiful, heartfelt silence. I had chosen myself over people who saw me as a resource. I had made peace with being called cruel by those who'd shown me cruelty my entire life. I had walked away from the role they'd assigned me. The responsible one, the backup plan, the person who would always sacrifice herself for a family that never sacrificed anything for her. The guilt they tried to weaponize had turned out to be nothing more than smoke. Insubstantial, easily dispersed once I stopped breathing it in. I scratched Cooper's ears and smiled. Freedom. I'd learned it sometimes required letting people think the worst of you. required accepting that some relationships couldn't be saved because they'd never been real in the first place. The phone stayed silent. The evening stayed peaceful. My life stayed mine. And somewhere out there, Meredith probably still thought I was pathetic and heartless, dying alone in my bitterness. She couldn't have been more wrong. But I'd stopped caring what she thought a long time ago. Is it ever truly selfish to protect your peace when the cost of family loyalty is your very self-worth?